The notification chimed at 3:47 a.m. System-wide failure. All servers down. My phone buzzed again, then again. By the fourth call from Redeye's emergency line, I was already smiling in the dark of my bedroom. 26 years of my life's work, and they thought they could just replace me? My name is Damien Torres, and I built Redeye Softwares from the ground up. Not the company that belonged to the suits who came later, but the actual backbone, the invisible architecture that made everything possible. 26 years of 12-hour days, weekend emergencies, and code that I crafted like poetry. I started at Redeye when it was just 8 people in a converted warehouse. The CEO, Jim Hartwell, hired me straight out of college with a handshake and a promise. Build something that lasts, Damien. And I did. Every database query, every security protocol, every optimization that kept their servers humming while competitors crashed. That was me. The company grew around my work. New employees would whisper stories about the ghost in the machine. The mysterious architect whose code was so elegant, so bulletproof, that nobody dared touch it. Managers came and went, but I remained constant. The foundation, the bedrock. I never sought recognition. The work was its own reward. Watching my system scale from hundreds to millions of users, seeing my security protocols withstand attacks that leveled other companies, that was enough. Or so I told myself. Maybe that was my first mistake. In Silicon Valley, invisible excellence is just invisible. The frustration started small. New hires questioning my methods. Managers suggesting modern frameworks to replace systems that had run flawlessly for decades. I'd explain the technical debt they'd inherit, the security vulnerabilities they'd introduce. They'd nod and ignore me. Age discrimination, they call it now. Back then, it was just disappointment wearing a different mask. The betrayal came on a Tuesday. I should have seen it coming, but 26 years of loyalty makes you blind to certain possibilities. Jim had retired 2 years earlier, replaced by a CTO named Bradley Kane, Harvard MBA, never wrote a line of production code in his life. Damien, we need to talk. Kane's office smelled like expensive cologne and ambition. He didn't look up from his laptop as I entered. We're restructuring the engineering department, bringing in some contractors to modernize our core systems. I felt the first flutter of anxiety. Which systems? All of them. Your work has been foundational, but frankly, it's showing its age. We need speed, agility. The contractors can deliver what you've been building in years, not decades. The humiliation hit like a physical blow. Years, not decades. As if the complexity of what I'd built was just procrastination. Bradley, you don't understand the technical debt. I understand costs. He finally looked at me, and I saw it. Resentment. Not for my work, but for my presence. A reminder of the old guard, the careful builders who stood in the way of rapid deployment and venture capital dreams. The contractors start Monday. We'll need documentation of your systems. You're firing me? We're offering you a severance package. Very generous. He slid a folder across the desk. 6 months' salary, full benefits, and a glowing recommendation letter. I stared at the folder without opening it. 26 years reduced to a transaction. And if I don't take it? Kane's smile was sharp as winter. Then we'll find other ways to reduce overhead. Your choice, Damien. That night, I sat in my empty apartment staring at the city lights, feeling the weight of betrayal settle in my chest like a stone. They'd used me, built an empire on my work, then discarded me the moment I became inconvenient. The anger was clean and bright, but beneath it lurked something deeper, the terrible clarity of purpose. I took the severance. What choice did I have? But I also took something else. A complete understanding of every system I'd built. Not stolen, I'd never needed to steal my own work, but documented, analyzed, and most importantly, understood at a level that no contractor could match. The first hint of their incompetence came through my old contacts. Messages from friends still inside. The new team is struggling with the authentication system. Database queries are timing out. Do you know why the backup protocols keep failing? I said nothing, just watched and waited. Within a month, their modernization had introduced 17 critical vulnerabilities. I knew because I still subscribed to the security bulletins, still monitored the forums where hackers discussed techniques. My old systems were mentioned by name, targets now, not fortresses. The anxiety of seeing my life's work crumble warred with a darker satisfaction. They wanted modern. They'd gotten fragile. Then came the revelation that changed everything. A late-night conversation with Elena Rodriguez, one of the few engineers who'd survived Kane's purge. We met at our old haunt, a 24-hour diner near the office where we'd solved countless problems over coffee and pie. "Damien, it's worse than you think?" she whispered, glancing around as if Kane might materialize from the shadows. "The contractors aren't just replacing your systems. They're reverse engineering them, planning to license the new architecture to other companies. Kane's calling it the Phoenix Framework." The betrayal went deeper than I'd imagined. They weren't just discarding my work. They were stealing it, rebranding it, planning to profit from decades of my innovation while I collected unemployment. The determination that sparked in that moment was cold as liquid nitrogen and twice as volatile. "Elena," I said carefully, "how long do you think their new systems will last under real pressure?" Her laugh was bitter. "A week? Maybe 2 if they're lucky. But Kane won't listen. He's already scheduled demos for potential clients." That's when I knew what I had to do. Not just expose their incompetence, but create something so revolutionary, so undeniably superior, that their theft would become irrelevant. The contractors had made one crucial mistake. They tried to copy my work without understanding its essence. I would show them the difference between imitation and innovation. The first ally came from an unexpected source. Jake Morrison had been Kane's golden boy until he'd seen the disaster unfolding firsthand. He reached out through encrypted channels, his message simple: "They're in over their heads. Can we talk?" We met at a coffee shop in Berkeley, far from Redeye's watchful eyes. Jake looked exhausted, his usual corporate confidence replaced by the hollow stare of someone who'd seen behind the curtain. "They're calling me a saboteur," he said without preamble, "just because I pointed out that their innovative solutions are introducing race conditions that could crash the entire platform." "What did you expect?" I stirred my coffee, watching the cream swirl like a miniature galaxy. "You can't build a skyscraper on a foundation of sand. Damien, I need to know. Is there a way to fix this without rebuilding everything?" I could have helped him, could have offered solutions, patches, band-aids to keep their failing systems limping along. Instead, I shook my head. "Some mistakes can't be undone, Jake. Sometimes you have to start over." He slumped in his chair. "Kane will never admit he was wrong. The board is backing him, and the contractors have them convinced that any problems are just growing pains. Then maybe it's time for some growing pains to become something more." Jake's eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "I mean that sometimes the best way to prove a point is to let people see the alternative, to show them what real innovation looks like." Our second meeting included Elena, then David Kim from the security team. Within weeks, I had a small network of allies, engineers who understood quality, who'd watched in horror as Kane's vision turned their workplace into a cautionary tale. But not everyone was sympathetic. The confrontation I'd been dreading came when I ran into Kane himself at an industry conference in San Francisco. He was holding court near the bar, regaling a group of investors with stories about Redeye's dramatic transformation. "Damien," his voice carried across the room like a challenge. "Gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Redeye's former architect. Damien here helped us understand exactly what we needed to modernize." The tension in the room was palpable. Every eye turned to me, waiting for my response. I could have made a scene, aired grievances, embarrassed him publicly. Instead, I smiled and extended my hand. "Bradley, still telling stories about architecture, I see." His grip was firm, probably intended to intimidate. "Just sharing our success story. The Phoenix Framework is generating quite a bit of interest." "I'm sure it is." I kept my voice level, professional. "Innovation always does." "Exactly. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions. Cut away the dead wood to let new growth flourish." The insult was delivered with a smile, but the message was clear. In his mind, I was dead wood. An obstacle removed, a problem solved. I felt the familiar spark of anger, but this time it was joined by something else. Anticipation. "You're absolutely right, Bradley. Dead wood should always be cleared away. Makes room for something better to grow." I walked away before he could respond, but I felt his eyes on my back. He'd heard something in my tone, a confidence that didn't match his narrative of a discarded employee. Good. Let him wonder. The attacks began subtly. Phone calls to my few remaining contacts, casual questions about my mental state and adjustment to retirement, LinkedIn messages from HR representatives at various companies. asking if I was available for consultation on projects that would conveniently conflict with any work I might be doing. Kane was trying to freeze me out of the industry entirely. The realization brought fresh waves of resentment and determination in equal measure. He wasn't content with destroying my career. He wanted to salt the earth behind him. Then came the lawyers. A cease and desist letter arrived on a Thursday, claiming that any software development I might be pursuing could constitute theft of Redeye's intellectual property. The legal reasoning was thin, but the threat was clear. Stay quiet or face litigation I couldn't afford. I called my old friend Thomas Brennan, now a partner at a tech law firm. His voice was careful, measured. Damien, I have to ask, are you working on anything that might compete with Redeye? Define compete. You know what I mean. Kane's people are saying you're developing some kind of revolutionary framework, that you're using proprietary knowledge from your time there. The paranoia was almost flattering. They were so afraid of what I might create that they were lashing out at shadows. Tom, every line of code I wrote for Redeye belongs to them. I wouldn't dream of stealing their intellectual property. But 26 years of experience doesn't belong to anyone. The knowledge in my head, the principles I've learned, the innovations I might discover, that's mine. The silence stretched between us. Finally, Tom sighed. Be careful, Damien. Kane has deep pockets and a grudge. That's a dangerous combination. But the real setback came from an unexpected source. Doubt. 3 months into my project, staring at screens full of code at 2 in the morning, I wondered if I was deluding myself. Maybe Kane was right. Maybe I was too slow, too set in my ways, too much a relic of an earlier era. The anxiety attacks started then. Waking up in cold sweats, wondering if I was wasting the last productive years of my career on a fantasy of revenge. Elena found me in the diner one night, my laptop closed, staring into cold coffee. You look like hell, she said, sliding into the opposite booth. Feel worse. I rubbed my eyes, feeling every one of my 53 years. What if he's right, Elena? What if I really am Deadwood? She was quiet for a long moment, then reached across the table and opened my laptop. The screen lit up, revealing elegant code structures that would have taken their contractors months to understand, let alone replicate. This, she said, pointing to a particularly complex algorithm, is why their system crashed yesterday. They tried to replace your load balancer with something more modern. It lasted 6 hours. The hope that flickered in my chest was small but steady. 6 hours. 6 hours. And that was with Jake secretly patching 3 critical flaws he found in the first hour. She closed the laptop and leaned back. Damien, I've seen their code. It's not just inferior, it's dangerous. What you're building here is not revenge. It's rescue. That night, I worked until dawn, driven by renewed purpose. Let Kane think I was dead wood. Dead wood, properly prepared, becomes the foundation for new growth. The breakthrough came at 4:23 a.m. on a Sunday in November. I'd been wrestling with a particularly complex problem: how to create a database architecture that could scale infinitely while maintaining perfect data integrity. The contractors at Redeye had solved this by accepting occasional data loss as acceptable overhead. Their solution made me sick. But sometimes the best solutions come from the intersection of exhaustion and inspiration. Staring at my whiteboard covered in equations and diagrams, I saw it, a completely new approach that turned the traditional client-server model inside out. Instead of central servers struggling to manage distributed data, what if the data managed itself? The concept was so elegant, so revolutionary, that I spent the next hour just walking around my apartment, testing it for flaws. There were none. This wasn't just an improvement on existing systems. It was a paradigm shift that would make everything else obsolete overnight. I called Elena, not caring about the early hour. She answered on the first ring, her voice thick with sleep. Damien? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. I need you to see something. An hour later, she stood in my apartment, staring at the whiteboard with the same expression I imagined I'd worn. This is impossible. Revolutionary. She turned to me, eyes wide. Damien, do you understand what this means? This doesn't just compete with their Phoenix framework. It makes it completely irrelevant. That's the idea. But Elena was already thinking bigger. No, you don't understand. This makes everyone's framework irrelevant. Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they're all building variations on the same centralized model. This changes everything. The magnitude of what I discovered began to sink in. This wasn't just revenge against Cain and his contractors. This was the kind of innovation that redefined entire industries. The kind that turned nobodies into legends and giants into footnotes. Elena, I need to ask you something important. I set down my coffee, meeting her eyes. If I release this, when I release this, Redeye stock price is going to crater. Cain's career will be over. A lot of good people might lose their jobs. She was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then, how many good people have already lost their jobs because of Cain's incompetence? How many more will lose them when his systems finally collapse completely? The moral calculus was complex, but the math was simple. Redeye was already failing. I could either let it happen slowly, taking down innocent employees and clients, or I could provide an alternative, a life raft for anyone smart enough to grab it. We'll need to be strategic about this, I said. I don't want to just destroy. I want to build something better. Elena nodded. What do you need? Time. And a way to test this without Cain's lawyers breathing down my neck. Leave that to me. Jake's been documenting every failure, every security breach, every corner they've cut. If Cain tries to claim you stole anything, we'll bury him in evidence of his own incompetence. That night, I began the most important work of my life. Not just coding, but architecting a revolution. The framework I was building didn't just solve problems. It eliminated entire categories of problems. It was the difference between treating symptoms and curing the disease. But revolutions require more than brilliant code. They require timing, strategy, and the courage to burn bridges you can never rebuild. As I worked through the night, line by line, I realized I was preparing to cross a threshold. Once I released this into the world, there would be no going back. Cain had called me dead wood. Soon, he'd learn the difference between dead and dormant. Some seeds only grow after fire clears the ground. The demo was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. Cain had gathered Redeye's biggest clients, potential investors, and several tech journalists to witness the revolutionary Phoenix framework in action. Elena had provided the details through our encrypted channels. Main conference room, full presentation setup, live system demonstrations. I chose to release my framework at exactly 2:30 p.m., 30 minutes into Cain's presentation. The timing wasn't coincidental. I wanted him in front of his audience when the world shifted beneath his feet. The framework I'd built wasn't just software, it was a statement. I'd structured it as an open-source project, completely free, with documentation so clear that any competent developer could implement it in hours. The name I'd chosen was deliberate, Phoenix Authentic. Let Cain try to claim trademark infringement on his stolen Phoenix branding. Jake had positioned himself in the back of the conference room, laptop ready. At 2:30 exactly, I pushed the code to GitHub and sent him the signal. A simple text message reading fire sale. The upload took 17 seconds. 17 seconds to make 26 years of careful planning irreversible. Jake later told me what happened next. Cain was mid-sentence, explaining how their innovative load balancing could handle millions of concurrent users, when phones around the room began buzzing. First one, then another, then all at once. Ladies and gentlemen, Cain continued, unaware of the digital earthquake spreading through the room. The Phoenix framework represents a complete reimagining of how we approach distributed computing. Excuse me. The interruption came from Jennifer Walsh, CTO of one of Redeye's biggest clients. She was staring at her phone, scrolling rapidly. Bradley, are you aware that someone just released an open-source framework that appears to make your entire architecture obsolete? The silence that followed was, according to Jake, so complete you could hear people's phones vibrating. Cain's face went through several shades of pale. I'm sorry, what? Phoenix Authentic. Jennifer continued reading from her screen. Claims to solve distributed computing through self-managing data nodes, eliminating the need for traditional server architecture entirely. The documentation includes a direct comparison to something called the Phoenix framework, showing how this approach makes centralized systems unnecessary. I imagine Cain's mind racing, trying to process the implications. His stolen framework hadn't just been countered, it had been made irrelevant by something fundamentally superior. Something that carried his branding but none of his limitations. Who released this? Cain's voice, Jake reported, had lost all its corporate confidence. The commit history shows a single developer, Jennifer replied, still scrolling. Username, Architect DT. Real name. She paused, and Jake said he could see the exact moment she made the connection. Damien Torres. The next 30 minutes, according to Jake's breathless account, were corporate theater at its finest. Kane tried to continue his presentation, claiming that the open-source project was clearly derivative of Redeye's work. But the journalists were already fact-checking, the clients were downloading and testing, and the investors were recalculating valuations in real time. By 3:15, 3 major tech blogs had published preliminary analyses. By 4 o'clock, Redeye's stock had dropped 12%. By close of business, Kane was in emergency meetings with the board, and my phone was ringing constantly with calls from reporters, recruiters, and CEOs. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat in my apartment, watching the cascade of notifications, feeling something I hadn't experienced in decades. Pure, undiluted vindication. The satisfaction was almost overwhelming, not just of being proven right, but of seeing justice served by excellence rather than revenge. That evening, Elena called with the final piece of the puzzle. Damien, you need to know, Kane's been fired. Effective immediately. The board is bringing in crisis management consultants and looking for an interim CTO. How are the employees handling it? Better than expected. Jake's already got teams downloading your framework, and the good engineers are excited about working with something elegant again. The contractors. She laughed. They're packing their laptops. 6 months later, I stood in the same conference room where Kane had tried to unveil his stolen Phoenix framework. But this time, I was the one at the podium, and the audience was different, engineers and CTOs from companies around the world who had implemented Phoenix Authentic with remarkable success. The transformation had been swift and decisive. Within weeks of my release, over 10,000 companies had adopted the framework. The performance improvements were undeniable. Faster processing, lower costs, better security, and scalability that made traditional architectures look like stone tools. Redeye had been one of the first to implement it. The new CTO, a brilliant woman named Lisa Chun who actually understood the technical implications, had called me personally to apologize for Kane's behavior and offer me any position I wanted. I politely declined, but agreed to serve as a technical advisor on my terms. The regret I felt wasn't for Kane or his contractors. They'd made their choices and faced the consequences. The regret was for the years I'd spent building in shadows, content to be invisible while others took credit. I'd learned that excellence without voice is just craftsmanship. True innovation requires the courage to stand in the light. The legal threats had evaporated once it became clear that my framework didn't just compete with their stolen work. It transcended it entirely. You can't claim theft when the stolen item is demonstrably superior to anything you could have created. Kane's lawyers had tried, briefly, but retreated when faced with the prospect of defending inferior code in court. The closure came in an unexpected form. A handwritten letter arrived 3 months after Kane's termination. His handwriting was careful, precise, the penmanship of someone who had taken time to choose each word. Damien, it began. I won't insult your intelligence by claiming I didn't know what I was doing was wrong. I saw talent that threatened my authority and chose to eliminate rather than elevate it. I paid the price for that choice, but you deserve to know. Your work was always better than I admitted, and your character was always stronger than I credited. I hope you find satisfaction in knowing that excellence, eventually, reveals itself. Respectfully, Bradley Kane. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. Not out of forgiveness, some betrayals can't be forgiven, but out of recognition that even small acknowledgments of truth have value. The anxiety that had plagued me during those dark months had been replaced by something I'd almost forgotten. Joy in creation. Phoenix Authentic wasn't just my revenge. It had become my legacy. A gift to every developer who'd ever struggled with the limitations of traditional architectures. Standing at that podium, looking out at faces eager to learn, I realized that Kane had been wrong about everything except one crucial detail. I was slow. Deliberately, methodically slow in the way that master craftsmen are slow. Not because they can't work faster, but because they understand that some things can't be rushed. 26 years to build expertise. 6 months to build revenge. 17 seconds to upload revolution. Sometimes the best things are worth waiting for. The empowerment I felt wasn't just personal, it was universal. Every engineer who implemented my framework, every company that achieved impossible performance gains, every startup that could now compete with giants, they were all part of the vindication. They were proof that excellence, given time and opportunity, always finds a way to surface. As I concluded my presentation and the applause filled the room, I thought about the notification that had started it all. System-wide failure. All servers down. Kane's systems had indeed failed, but from their ashes had risen something stronger, more elegant, more lasting. Dead wood, properly prepared, becomes the foundation for new growth. But sometimes, if you wait long enough and tend the soil carefully, what grows back isn't just new. It's magnificent.